Hey guys, welcome back to Learning Fun with Didi. And today we are gonna read Euby Holler by Sharon Creech, chapters 4 to 6. So excited, let's get started. So, chapter 4 is Marsh, and it's on page 14. So we're going to go ahead and go to page 14. Kind of hard to hold. Just move like this. Marsh. Dallas and Florida sat at their usual places in the far corner of the narrow. Dallas and Florida sat at their usual places in the far corner of the narrow dining room in the Boxing Creek home. They were not allowed to sit on the long benches with the other children because the Trepids didn't want the other children to learn any bad habits from Florida and Dallas. The Trepids would have preferred Dallas and Florida to be meek and cowed like the others. Florida poked at the mush on her plate. "Do you think there's any real food in this glob?" "Might be," Dallas said. "I think I spy a piece of meat stuff." He relatively stabbed the chunk of meat, imagining that it was steak, the juiciest, best steak in the world. "Well, I think it's chopped up cardboard," Florida said, "and ground tree bark with a dash of hog's blood thrown in for color." She caught the eye of a new girl on the end of the long bench and waved to her. "Uh-oh," Dallas said as he spotted Mr. Trepid slipping up behind Florida. "Ow," Florida said. "Why are you whacking my head for?" "What are you whacking my head for?" "Keep your hands to yourself," Mr. Trepid ordered. Dallas stared at Mr. Trepid's gold tooth. He imagined himself as a dentist, removing that gold tooth, pocketing it, and refitting Mr. Sorry, wait. My hands are sorry, just Mr. Trepid with something else. Maybe something red, maybe plastic shaped like a fang. "My hands are to myself," Florida told Mr. Trepid. "Look, see how they're attached to my arms? Quit whacking me on the head. I will quit whacking you on the head when you put your hands in your lap where they're supposed to be." Florida placed her hands in her lap, and when Mr. Trepid moved away, Dallas said, "How are you going to eat with your hands in your lap?" Florida leaned forward and lapped at the mush with her tongue. Mr. Trepid returned in a flash. "My hands are in my lap. Eat with your fork," Mr. Trepid ordered. "Well, how am I supposed to do that if my hands are in my lap?" Florida said. Dallas was eyeing his plate, trying not to move a muscle. If he laughed, Mr. Trepid would smack him. The new girl was staring at Florida, and Mr. Trepid. "Does he do that to everybody?" she whispered to the boy next to her. The boy looked terrified. With one hand he covered his mouth, and with the other he gestured at the rules posted on the wall. The first rule in the dining room was no talking. At 7:30 the buzzer sounded. Dallas washed the last pan and tossed it on the shelf. "To the palace," he said. Florida raced down the hall to the grimy dark dungeon of the decrepit I don't know how to pronounce that, whatever that word is. Palace. Quit that running. Quit that shouting, Mrs. Trepid yelled. Get into your rooms. All of down the hall they ran, zipping in and out of all of other children's rooms. The other children laughed at Dallas and Florida, but quickly closed their doors after they'd passed, laughing at Dallas and Florida with the serious offense in the eyes of the Trepids. Once inside the rooms, Dallas and Florida each pried up a loose floorboard and deposited their takings from the kitchen, one nearly whole piece of bread and one raw potato each. It was always good to know that there was something under the boards, something to stave of hunger in the night. Later that night, Florida tossed and turned. She dreamed about the hoppers and then woke up, mad at herself for letting the hoppers into her dreams, and now into her waking thoughts. She and Dallas were 5 years old when they were sent to the hoppers for the first few days. They thought they'd landed in heaven. They had their own room, and every day the hoppers gave them a new toy. But then Mrs. Hopper started getting headaches and kept asking them to be quiet and not touch things. Dallas and Florida tried to be quiet. They tried not to touch things, but sometimes they forgot. One day, Florida picked up a $10 bill that was lying on the kitchen counter. She was studying the pictures on it when Mr. Hopper snatched it from her and slapped her arm. Don't you ever steal from me again, you hear? He looked very mean. Way up there, glaring down at her. Her insides felt jumbled and queasy. She started noticing little piles of money everywhere. A pile of bills on the kitchen table, a few more on the bookcase, a jar full of quarters. She wasn't ever going to touch their money again. One day she came downstairs and saw Dallas sitting on the living room floor with the jar of quarters in front of him. His hand was dipped way inside, and he was swirling the quarters around. Mr. Hopper bolted into the room and grabbed the jar, wrenching Dallas's hand out of it. You little thief, Mr. Hopper said. Florida seized the jar from Mr. Hopper and smashed it on the floor, sending quarters and shards of glass spattering across the floor like hundreds of silver beetles. The next day, Dallas and Florida were back at Boxing Creek home. Mr. Hopper told the Trepids that he and Mrs. Hopper had made a mistake. They weren't ready for children. If Florida had been older, she might have felt that Mr. Hopper was right and that she was lucky to be away from the Hoppers. But she wasn't older. She was 5, and what she felt was that she and Dallas had been very bad, and they would never be in a real family. Now in her room at the Boxing Creek home, Florida wondered why she had dreamed about the Hoppers. They were neither the first nor the last that Dallas and Florida had been sent to, and they were certainly not the worst. As she drifted back to sleep, though, she was swallowed up by another nightmare about the Hoppers. Next door, Dallas heard Florida whimpering. He clapped his closet and lifted the cardboard flap covering a hole in the wall. Florida, what's the matter? Florida sat up, looking around. She skipped out of bed, tiptoed to her closet, and knelt beside the hole. I was having a maggoty nightmare about those Hopper people, she said. Don't think about them. Dad said, erase them. Someday we'll get on that freight train and ride out of town, and we'll be on our own. We won't have to put up with people like that. Someday we'll live in a beautiful place, and on he went like that until Florida calmed down and curled up on the floor of her closet and fell asleep. Chapter 5, Thinking Corners. Dallas had been showing one of the younger boys how to throw a tennis ball over the roof of the Boxing Creek home. You pull your arm back like this. See, you have to aim high, and the last minute snap your wrist like this. See? The ball sailed upward, curving toward the roof, but veered suddenly, crashing into a window. Now Dallas sat on a stool in the basement thinking corner. The first few minutes in the corner were the hardest because he'd see that damp cement wall and the ghostly cobwebs and spiders, and he'd be reminded of a cellar that Hanford had once been locked in. He closed his eyes. Not going there, he told himself, not going into that cellar, going somewhere else, going somewhere green and sunny, going where there are trees and birds. And soon enough, he was there in his mind, in the place where trails wound through the trees, and where a boy who could throw anything he wanted and it wouldn't get him in trouble. 2 hours later, Mr. Trippett opened the basement door and called out to Dallas, "Out of there, boy. Got another reservation for that space." As Dallas climbed the steps, he saw Florida standing beside Mr. Trippett, trying to wiggle out of her grasp. I was just running. I didn't mean to stomp on those flowers," she told Mr. Trippett. "And that hole in the wall, I was just trying to get a little air in that putrid room." "You just go down there and think about it," Mr. Trippett said. As Florida passed Dallas on the steps, she said, "My turn. I hope you kept the seat warm." Florida stomped across the basement room and kicked the wall and stool. "I heard that," Mr. Trippett called from above. "You've just earned yourself an extra hour down there." Putrid man, Florida thought. Putrid basement, putrid thinking corner. She sat on the stool with her arms crossed. "You can't make me think if I don't want to." She tried to make her mind a blank white canvas. But as hard as she tried, she couldn't keep the canvas blank. Splotches found their way on it. Splotches which turned into images, which turned into people. That morning, she had seen a woman pass by the home. The woman was tall and large-boned, with frizzy, unruly hair. "That's a little bit like my hair," Florida had thought. "Hey, Mom," she had called. The woman, startled, turned to Florida, who immediately ducked back in the doorway of the home. Florida peeked around the door, watching the woman hurry away. Now in the basement thinking corner, Florida saw that woman again in her mind, and she thought, well, she could have been my mother. And that reminded her of the man she had seen with Mr. Trippett the night before in the alley behind the home. The man's back was to her, but he stood in sort of a loose-limbed way, his feet splayed out, his arms swinging at his sides. For some reason, his standing like that reminded her of Dallas. She almost called out, "Hey, Dad!" But then the man had turned, and she saw his matted hair, and there was something about him that had frightened her. She was glad she hadn't called out to him. My father wouldn't look like that, she thought. Now she opened her eyes and saw a spider scurrying down the wall. She hopped off her seat, picked up the sword, and hurled it against the wall, smashing the spider. The basement door opened. Mr. Trippett said, "I heard that. Keep that up, and you're going to be down there all day." Chapter 6. The Opportunity. Mrs. Trippett had a hold of Florida's arm and was pulling her down to the hall. "I wasn't doing anything, honest," Florida said. "Where are you taking me?" Mr. Trippett dragged Dallas in through the back door. "I was just digging up some worms," Dallas protested. Are you accidentally you were accidentally squeezing my arm?" Mr. and Mrs. Trippett ushered Florida and Dallas into their office and closed the door. "Don't sit down. You're a mess," Mr. Trippett said. "I wasn't going to sit anywhere," Florida said. "Take off those oven bad shirts and put on the clean ones," Mr. Trippett ordered. "What for?" Florida asked. "You said we had to wear these scratchy, smelly, putrid things for the rest of the week." "Take them off," Mr. Trippett repeated. "You two are going somewhere." Florida flashed Dallas a look. They'd heard this before. Not many times. No, we're not. Too many times, sorry. No, we're not, Florida said. We're going to be here until we die. Mrs. Trepid sank into a chair. I certainly hope not, she said. I certainly pray that is not the case. Mr. Trepid said, we have an opportunity for you, a splendid opportunity. He looked at his wife. Don't we, Mrs. T? Don't we have a splendid opportunity for these two young people? We're not going to any more of those foster places, Frida said. If that's what you've got in your mind, you can just forget it. Dallas touched Frida's elbow. Well, we might if it was the right place, like a mansion or something. As Mr. Trepid smiled, a slow smile, the light speckled of his gold front tooth. This is the grand opportunity. I suppose you could consider it a temporary, very temporary foster arrangement. Mrs. Trepid said, not going. Wait, Mrs. Trepid said, not going, Florida said. That last place you sent us had more fleas than a mangy dog and a zillion snakes. Not quite a zillion, Dallas said. 100 zillion, Florida said, and lizards. And that guy was crazy. That guy was a lunatic. Mrs. Trepid winced. Perhaps that last placement was ill-advised. But this is a traveling opportunity, Mr. Trepid interrupted. His tongue slithered over his golden tooth. Florida and Dallas exchanged a glance. What sort of traveling are you talking about? Dallas asked. Florida whispered to him, don't trust him. Don't fall for it. They're probably sending us to Siberia. Mrs. Trepid opened a folder on her desk. Let's see, she said, pulling out a pamphlet. There's a river trip across the state to the Rutabaga River. Florida leaned toward the desk. Huh? She said. Mrs. Trepid pulled another pamphlet from her folder. And let's see. There's also a little trip to the Kingadoon. Dallas strained to the pamphlet. You mean the Kingadoon? Way out in the ocean? That Kingadoon? In his mind, he had already propelled himself there. He was splashing in the ocean. He was running through the hills. Mr. Trepid handed the Rutabaga pamphlet to Florida and the Kingadoon one to Dallas. We have a very, very nice and respectable couple. Don't trust him, Florida whispered to. Remember that last very, very nice couple with the snakes? Dallas saw himself climbing a tall, tall tree in Kingadoon and perching on a branch high above the hills. He had a spyglass and was surveying the ocean on the lookout for pirates. Mr. Trepid continued, and this very, very nice and respectable couple are looking for some strapping young people. To do what? Florida said. Be their slaves, hose down their hogs, clean out their snake pits. Mr. Trepid folded his hands as if in prayer. This very, very nice couple and respectable couple are looking for two young people to accompany them to the Rutabaga River and to the Kingadoon. Now, during your summer vacation, Dallas, up in his imaginary tree in Kingadoon, had spotted a ship far out on the ocean. Pirates. However, Mrs. Trepid said, they're not going together. They need one person to go to the Rutabaga and one person to go to the Kingadoon. You mean would be split up? Florida said. You can't do that. We are not splitting up. We're never splitting up. It's only for 3 months, Mrs. Trepid said to her husband. She added, unfortunately, Dallas blinked back to Mr. and Mrs. Trepid's office. Did we get to meet these pirates first? He asked. What pirates? Mrs. Trepid said. What on earth are you talking about? The people. Ferda said, "Do we get to meet and see if they're a couple of lunatics or what?" Mrs. Shepherd smiled. "But of course, Mr. T," she said. Mr. Shepherd scuttled out of the office and returned minutes later with a white-haired couple. "Allow me to introduce Mr. Triller Morey and his wife, Sari," he said. Dallas stared at the man whose left eye looked a bit droopy. Maybe he'd worn a patch there. Ferda looked at Dallas. "A couple of lunatics," she whispered. A couple of old lunatics. So in the next video, we are going to read chapters 7 to 9. So, bye!